The Rebel Capitalist Show.
By the government intervening and doing this stimulus check and creating all of these programs to combat any micro downturn in the economy, or more importantly, in asset prices, they're creating an environment where there is no economic recovery. Because
Right.
if you think about the economy in terms of goods and services, are we producing more or less now? And as a result of what has been done
Way
by the
less.
central planners in 2020, are we going to be producing more or less in the future? And let's talk about regulations. I wanted to ask you, you said you did the study for the research for that 20-page report. What are some of the common denominators that lead to wealth creation? We talked about it as productivity, but how is that done? And the research I've done, it's when you create a free market environment, private property rights, you have sound money, very low taxation and low regulation, and let people go out there, pursue their own self-interest, and bring up society as a whole. Did you find anything that's contrary to that?
No, I did an analysis of GDP. I got in an argument with, I think it was a Stanford economist named Kennedy, and I suggested to him that the Great Depression didn't end until after the war, that the war didn't end the Depression, that the Depression, that we maintained an incredibly small footprint, an incredibly austere existence, and building up potential demand for the future while the war was going on. And he said, well, the stats don't support that, and that's kind of an urban legend, and that the GDP grew 15%. For about 10 years, I pondered his claim. And then last year I wrote about it, where I said, look, the GDP also included the GDP of the war machine, and there's a massive depreciation. So the thing that people are missing in terms of both inflation and in GDP is that if you produce something that lasts for 50 years, you've produced wealth. If you produce something that lasts 10 minutes, you've produced nothing. So if I buy a cordless drill for $80, I've accrued some sort of wealth, right? That thing has potential to do a lot of stuff for me. If I take my family to the movie for $80, good luck. That lasted 2.5 hours. Right. And so those are very different contributors to GDP. And so when you build a house, it's wealth. And when you just consume services, it's not. And if you somehow can, again, parlay your consumption of service into you creating wealth in some other way, right? So if you are some sort of businessman, and by doing Chinese takeout, you can work longer hours at work and create more widgets, then the Chinese takeout's kind of contributed to the wealth creation by providing for you something that allows you to do more, right? So there is a synergy there. But some of it's just people doing takeout 5 nights a week, when they could have lived a better existence, and they could have learned to cook for themselves. And they could have saved more money, saved more capital, and again, the units of wealth, right? So if the dollar retains its purchasing power and you accrue more dollars, then you have accrued wealth, right? But you're not accruing wealth if you accrue more dollars because they're cranking them. You know that, I know that. The Fed doesn't seem to understand that. The last year was so full of messages that a lot of people missed. For example, if you think that bad events pop bubbles, you miss the COVID crisis, right? So I posted a tweet yesterday, and I said, it said the S&P is up 49% over the last year. And I said, wasn't this the year of our Lord 2020, where we had a catastrophic lockdown? And so people feel much richer because their equities went up 49%, but there's nothing about 2020 that was productive. Right. There's nothing about 2020 that was productive.
And also too, when you think about, why do you want to increase your purchasing power? You want to increase your purchasing power because it increases your freedom.
That's exactly right.
So
that's exactly right.
So even if your balance sheet looks better, so what? You're locked in your house. You can't, right. In a lot of states, you can't go to the gym. You can't go to the restaurant. You can't enjoy your life, for heaven's sakes. So right. What difference does it make? Another thing I'd like your opinion on, Dave, is back when I was growing up, when you're a teenager or you're going to college, it was just assumed. And when you talk to your buddies about getting rich or making money, the way that you did that, it was understood that you would go out there and you had to bust your ass. You had to
Right.
work hard and you had to create a good or service that people valued more than the money in their back pocket. Now, I was at the driving range the other day when I was in Tucson, and I was surrounded by college students, guys out there on a Sunday morning just hitting balls. There were about three groups of these college guys, 16, 17, 18 years old, whatever. And every single one of them was talking about how they could get rich, not by producing stuff, not by working hard, but by trading cryptocurrency.
Well, years ago, I was talking to one of my colleagues in the B school, and who used to work at Merck, and then he worked at JP Morgan. He was an affluent guy, certainly, and he said that he asked one of our MBA students what she wanted to do, and she said, this is probably 15 years ago. She said, well, I'd like to get a job on Wall Street and work for a couple of years and then retire. And somehow she thought that was a bit. I watched people who are 60 years old who have had a job that's not a huge income producing job retire, and I'm looking, I'm going, you could live another 40 years. Yeah. Have you really accrued enough wealth in the preceding 40 to live for another 40? Have you really accrued that kind of wealth? Because I've done really, really well for myself, and I'm not giving up before 70. I'm not cashing my chips until I'm 70. I could retire today, not going to happen.
Yeah, but they think they have, Dave, because they
believe
in pro forma numbers from the stock market, making a 12% return from now till infinity, compounded.
A survey showed they think 16%.
Yeah,
16% off valuations that are by any measure off the charts. Yeah, this is the biggest bubble in history, and they think they're getting 16% from here. Whereas I think a good estimate would be over 10 years, you might lose 6% compounded.
So what
that's kind of a Felder estimate.
Right. So what does that do to the economy when we've built our entire economy around these asset bubbles? So if the only way for our economy to improve, if you want to look at GDP, technically is for asset bubbles to continue to go up. But if these asset bubbles go down, like you were saying you were expecting at the beginning of the conversation, then what on earth does that do to the US economy? And how would the central planners try to prevent that in the future if we saw what we saw in the GFC, and then we get more and more and more extreme till we get to 2020? What on earth do they do next if the S&P goes down over the next few months by, say, 50% for whatever reason?
Being an outsider coming in through the back door of this world has disadvantages and advantages. One of the advantages, I'm unfettered by education. There's a couple of maxims that I go by. One is that the two most important things, tenets of capitalism, one is price discovery, and the other is the cost of the most important asset of them all, and that's capital. So the capital markets are founded upon the idea that borrowers and lenders meet in what we'll call the money markets and haggle over the value of their capital, and doing so produce price discovery. And now we've got central bankers and politicians in the better part of the world who think that the price of the most important asset in the world should be set by a committee of bureaucrats.
Right.
What kind of, so I don't think there's a way that you can be founded on that kind of thinking that doesn't end poorly. That's just cockeyed thinking. It's as though you were 13 years old and your frontal cortex was just not there yet, and somehow the Fed doesn't seem to understand it at all. The stuff they say, either that or they're inveterate liars, which I'm inclined to believe. I'm inclined to give them credit for not being that stupid. I keep vacillating because then all of a sudden J-Po will say something like yesterday where he said that that low inflation hurts the little guy. Low inflation hurts the little guy. And I'm going, would someone put a bag over his head? He's just euthanize him. There's not even high order brain function showing up on the screen at this point.